and welcome back to the podcast. It is always up to speed with Formula One here on the Overtime Media Network. Mark here, Daly and Hamilton back again. It feels like Simon and Simon. It's got like a very 80s cop show vibe, doesn't it? But it works, or Mark Squared or something. I don't know. We got to come up with something a little bit catchier. But welcome back, man. How's it going? It sounds like you've been having a week.
Yeah, you know what? It's crazy, and I'm sure yours is. And it sucks too because, we're 17 days out from the first race of the season, and this is usually the time of year where I'm soaking it all up. I'm on Reddit, I'm on Twitter, I'm reading the news stories, and I feel like, and I probably shouldn't be admitting this to all of our users, probably a little bit more detached from the pulse of the sport than I should be. So hopefully today's conversation will be a good way to become a little bit more centered and a little bit more balanced. But yeah, man, 17 days. And I think, you and I were just talking about this a couple of minutes ago. We're an hour and 45 minutes away from preseason testing getting underway in Bahrain. So in theory, depending on how long we run, we might run into preseason testing. So we might be able to comment on the first couple of minutes.
Well, I'd be remiss if I did backtrack for a moment because I was having some serious afterthoughts after we did the show. It was somewhat a little bit late last week just because of circumstances. So we dropped the last week's show on Saturday rather than Thursday night, Friday morning here in North America. And we went ahead and did our bracket, our March Madness bracket, with all 9 teams all 10 teams except for the Ferrari release. And then that dropped just a couple of days ago this week. But after seeing the Ferrari, I feel entirely justified, and I completely feel relaxed and confident that we knocked them out in the quarterfinals or whatever it was. I didn't feel like, based on what I saw in that lukewarm efforts, that they deserve to progress any further in our bracket this year. What are your thoughts on the Ferrari?
Yeah, the same. And I felt justified. And to be honest, like it was going to have to be something pretty incredible to kind of force us to go back and adjust our brackets or reevaluate the way we place the teams. I look at it, it's a matte finish. I appreciate a red car with kind of a glossy look. It's a matte finish. There's kind of a basic gradient to a darker red on maybe the back 20% of the car. And then for me, the killer is I really don't like Mission Winnow. I don't like that statement. I don't like that association. I don't like the fact that, regardless of the reason why, I don't like the fact that these tobacco companies are creeping back into the sport. And last year it was there, the M with the upside down W or the M with the W, like it was there, but it wasn't as prominent. The problem this year is they've embossed it in neon. So you have this neon outline of the Mission Winnow emblem on the car, like on the shark fin, on the engine cover and the side pod. Like, it's not a good look. I don't like the red. It's super underwhelming. To me, it's nothing special. And to your point, I would knock it down. In fact, if we were to redo the bracket today, I'd have Ferrari play in the play-in bracket. Like I wouldn't even have given them an entry into the tournament. But yeah, super, super, super unimpressed. And like I said, I really like red cars with gloss. And I think the Ferraris really pop when they're glossy, especially under the sun or under the lights of a night race. This is matte, super not cool. I think I feel the same way as you, man.
Well, it's interesting because when we were chatting about it a couple of days ago, earlier this week, I think I texted you something to the effect of, in a car or a livery that's supposed to be stunning in its simplicity, this one fell like really short.
Yeah.
And then if you look at it, it really felt like they just slapped a bunch of sponsor logos all over the place. And that the big Mission Win Now thing on the airbox, like you say, it just really sticks out. So I'm cool with our final two. Our final with Aston Martin edging out the Mercedes W12. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with the way how it turned out. But I am super excited that we are literally just minutes away now from the first testing sessions of the year. That's exciting. And when I was looking at it today, when I saw that we're 14 days away today on Thursday night, March 11th, here it is on the West Coast. 14 days away from FP1 in Bahrain. So wow. It's starting to get pretty real and pretty exciting. I'm pretty happy to say or to feel like we're right on the top of things. But it was pretty interesting. I mean, if you look at some of the drivers that are going to be on the track today, we're going to see both the Mercedes drivers. We're going to see Max Verstappen, both Danny Ricciardo and Lando Norris out there in the McLaren, both the Aston Martin drivers. Only Esteban Ocon for Alpine, which is, I think pretty logical considering Alonso had that bike accident a couple of weeks ago. Both Ferrari drivers, and we're going to see Gasly and Tsunoda out in the AlphaTauri, and Kimi Räikkönen, Giovinazzi out in the Alfa Romeo. And then we're going to see Mick Schumacher, Nikita Mazepin in the Haas, and then Roy Nissany out in the Williams. So I mean, pretty much the teams are going with their top drivers. Not too many reserve drivers or junior drivers out there. And well, we're not going to see the Mercedes tomorrow or on Sunday, but still pretty exciting to see. But I mean, we're going to see the Aston Martin guys. Both Seb and Lance are going to be out there Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And looks like they're going to put in some serious miles on that on the AMR 21. See, not even first race of the year, and I got that one.
Well done, well done. I would have just said the green car. I haven't got the model numbers memorized yet. I think that's a really good summary. And forgive me if we're going to get into this a little bit, but for those of you that are kind of newer to the sport, and I think based on what we've heard from a lot of you over the last couple of weeks, especially this whole kind of new ingestion or intake of these Drive to Survive fans. Winter testing is really important, but historically it was 8 days spread over 2 weeks. So you basically had this huge 2-week block where the cars were just piling hundreds of kilometers on the cars. Last year, the year before, it was truncated down to 6 days, 2 3-day sessions over 2 weeks. This year, it's 1 3-day session over a weekend. And this period is really important for the teams because this is the first time that they can take their cars, their 2021 cars, out to the track and do a meaningful shakedown. So a lot of these teams have had cars on the track, but they've been traditionally for sponsorship reasons. They're out there taking press photos, they're just getting the drivers kind of acquainted to the cockpit and things like that. But this is the first time that they're actually stress testing these cars. And it's really important because the teams only have 3 days to do it. And you just kind of knocked on it. Like, we're going to be into free practice 1 in 14 days. These teams have 3 days in these cars before free practice 1. And what's also really interesting about this is when you look back at years past, the teams could have both cars on the track at the same time. They can't. So we look at these days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, they're kind of split into a morning session and an afternoon session. So you're basically going to have one driver in a morning session or an afternoon session. Or in the case of Williams, and I really don't understand what's going on here, is they're only going to execute on 1 session a day. So they're going to have Nissany out on Friday, they're going to have Latifi out on Saturday, and they're going to have Russell out on Sunday, which means that prior to Q1 or pre-practice 1 in 14 days, Nicholas Latifi has 1 session in that car, 1 day in that car, which is, and again, he's not like he's a rookie driver and he knows what he's doing, but it's not a lot of time to become familiar with the new cars, especially with the floor changes and things like that. So to me, this is pretty interesting. I'm not saying I want to go back to 8 days because I think from a media perspective, it's exhausting to spend that much time at the track. But the one benefit that it does potentially have for some of these teams is, and we talked about this the last couple of weeks, the teams are really secretive of their cars leading up to this event. So I think the less time that their cars are necessarily exposed, the better. But what we'll also see this year, and they don't like this, is in the past in winter testing, if they brought the car back into the garage, they would put up the shrouds. They can't put up the shrouds anymore. So it kind of creates a little less privacy. But yeah, 3 days, it's crazy. But at the same time, I'm happy we moved through it. And to your point, we're at free practice in almost no time.
I know, it's great, isn't it? And I was just kind of thinking when you're kind of like just breaking that all down, it's like we'll put more miles on our car going down to Costco than these guys.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it really is a far cry of what it used to be, even back in way back in like the 90s and years gone by when they'd test almost unlimited. I mean, they do like mid-season testing and things like that. Developing the car, it's a far cry from where it used to be. But I think it's a good thing, especially in this new era of cost restraints and cost caps and things like that. It just I think it's a good way, and I think it. I wonder if it's going to throw a bit of a degree of unpredictability into the season, especially in the early races for the
teams great point.
May not have ironed out all the bugs, and but I mean for the drivers, like you're just talking about the Williams drivers, that they're only going to get 1 session in that car before we hit the Bahrain Grand Prix in a couple of weeks. I mean, it's one thing to sit there in the simulator and do all these things too, but there's nothing like getting in the car and doing the real thing. So it's going to be fascinating to watch. But I think that the one thing that really stood out for me is the fact that both Aston Martin drivers are going to be out there all weekend as well. So they're really going at it hard right from the word go, and we'll see how that translate into results, or maybe not in a couple of weeks. But exciting! It's a great time of year. Now, slightly less exciting is the news that Alfa Romeo boss Frederick Vasseur has tested positive for COVID-19, and he's going to miss preseason testing. So not a great great way for Alfa Romeo to start the season, because he's going to have to self isolate. And he did have he tested positive in one test, and a couple of days later on a follow-up he tested negative. He's still self-isolating, things like that. So regardless if he gets sick or not, I mean, he does have to self-isolate, and that's a tough time for especially a small team like that to be missing one of their key team members right at the start of the season. So we hope he gets back into action quickly. And I thought this was interesting as well. Lance Stroll, he's one of the drivers, one of three guys that were diagnosed with, were tested positive at least with COVID last year. And he actually said he underestimated how much of a toll, where that was a word that he used, the toll that that COVID would have on him. And it knocked him out of the German Grand Prix. And then he said it really affected him for the following two races after that. And he said it was just he had no energy physically. He was just completely wiped out, and he wasn't even in a great place mentally. I mean, and I think sometimes that is a something that's maybe overlooked a little bit. I mean, we all know it, like the physical skill that these guys have and the physical conditioning, but the mental sharpness that you have to be, or you have to possess, to be a Formula One driver and to react in in a split second is probably too slow. But it's interesting that Lance is admitting that it really did affect him for those couple of races until he really got back. And he had a really awesome race, obviously, in Turkey. But it was a tough year for Lance.
Yeah, particularly interesting, of course, because he's a younger driver. He's supremely active and supremely fit, and it really knocked him off the feet. And it's not unlike, I think, what we've seen in a lot of the top flights of European football, and even in the NBA over here, where we've had a couple of prominent stars that have been infected with COVID. And it causes a serious problem for them, particularly in their ability to get their fitness back and start conditioning. Like, we've seen some really prominent NBA players like Russell Westbrook, who's a supremely talented, incredibly athletic player, just get knocked off of his feet. And it took him months to regain his step and his bounce and his fitness. And in Formula One, maybe we don't see that as much because they're kind of in the cockpit, but it maybe isn't a surprise then that his two results coming out of that German Grand Prix were pretty mediocre. And again, I think we underestimate as well how important fitness and core strength and cardio is to these drivers. And I think that was ultimately the impact. So fortunately, he recovered by the time we got to Turkey, as you mentioned, but yeah, still a very serious concern for drivers going into the season, right? Like, and you'd mentioned as well that the sport effectively had an offer from the Bahraini government to be provided with vaccinations. And I think the sport decided that for the sake of optics, that they would wait their place in line, particularly in the UK, where most of the teams and the drivers and the engineers and the mechanics are based. But again, this is going to be a threat for probably the first half of the season, right? Which is, you could have a driver, even a young driver, that becomes infected and might miss a race. And even if they return quickly, they might take some time to recover. And again, this is very much a conspiracy theory Hamilton comment, but I'm still convinced that Hamilton wasn't ready to come back in Abu Dhabi last year, and his hand was forced because of George's performance. And I don't think in normal circumstances there's any way he would have come back for that race either.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder, because he didn't need to come back. I mean,
exactly
would have been sewn up. I mean, there was absolutely, under normal circumstances, there was no benefit for him to come back just for that one-off race in what was just really a footnote to the season itself. But yeah, I mean, it is interesting, because I mean, you do hear these stories in the news quite regularly of people that have suffered from COVID, the long haulers that they call them, that are still suffering the after effects months and months after testing negative and getting over the initial bout of the illness. Okay, well, let's move along here, and we'll go on to this next one before we head into our first break. And this one I think is interesting, because Formula's come out and said that they've been having talks with Amazon about TV rights and streaming. And I think that this is absolutely fascinating. I think that this is, I think this is a sign of things to come, because, you and I were talking about it, and I'm a big cycling fan. I love watching all the classics. I love watching the Grand Tours. And, you were able to watch the Giro and the Tour and the Vuelta on cable TV here until a couple of years ago. I guess, the interest here is just too small. But the thing is, now I can sign up for one of these streaming services. They have a native app in Apple TV. and I can sit down and enjoy it. You know, I don't miss the fact that it's not on TSN or it's not on Sportsnet or something like that, or the equivalent. And I think that, you know, there's obviously a pay component to that because, you know, be it Netflix, be it Amazon Prime or something like that, there is a cost involved in that. But at the same time, I can't help but feel that a move like this would also potentially help get it out there to more people. Because, I mean, we've heard this, you know, the drive to survive, your generation Netflix, right? I think that's where we're going to call these new F1 fans, Generation Netflix. These people that were exposed to it with never even seen it before until they saw it on Netflix, watched the Drive to Survive seasons, were instantly hooked by it. And I just can't help but thinking that, you know, if they were able to make it available through one of these platforms, whether or not it would actually indeed expose more people to the sports, it could be a masterstroke if it comes to pass.
It's a no-brainer from a business perspective. You have absolutely nothing to lose, and you know, maybe you compromise some of your traditional TV contracts a little bit. And I think one of the kind of the best scenarios to look at is here in Canada, the network that carries Formula One races, and they do a terrible job. They don't do a good job. They don't embed a lot of customized, localized coverage. They did in the past with Tim Hauraney, where they would have him intro and outro and do a little bit of commentary and a little bit of color in between segments, but they don't do a good job. They basically just kind of just throw up the Sky TV rights and things like that. But in Canada, TSN was actually out of contract going into last season. And Formula One was desperate to get the F1 TV Pro app up and running in this country. And part of their negotiation with TSN was like, understand that this app is going to happen. And I think part of the outcome of that negotiation was that TSN ultimately paid a little bit less, knowing that they were going to shed some viewers, but it also gave Formula One the ability to maximize potential revenue off of what they see to be the future of the sport, which is their app, right? Ultimately, for them, driving revenue through the app is preferable. They don't have to do a rev share. They have a better opportunity to capture all of the associated revenue. But to your point as well, I think you make a great point. And I look at a TV bundle or a package, like in Canada, typically some people have direct digital satellite, but a lot of people still have digital or HD cable boxes. So in Canada, some of our bigger providers are Rogers in Eastern Canada and it's Shaw in Western Canada. For me, I can't stomach the idea of paying $100 or $150 a month for a cable package, because at the end of the day, for me, it's like buying and cooking a turkey. There's all this turkey, but all I'm going to eat is a little bit of the white meat and I'm going to throw the rest of it away. Like, I'm not going to pay $150 a month so I can watch a 2-hour race every 2 weeks on TSN. So for me, being able to subscribe to an app like the F1 TV Pro app, it's much more surgical. It's much more precise, and I'm not getting all of that waste. But to kind of get back to your core question, like, I think you're absolutely right. I think as more and more people cord cut, and it's happening en masse, and you've seen networks like ESPN in the States hemorrhage cash because they've been so dependent on the sub fees associated with cable subscribers. I think there's a huge opportunity. And I think Amazon's a really good one, because if you look at Amazon's subscriber base and you look at the number of people that utilize the Amazon Prime Video app, like, there's something there. Do you know what I mean? There's more people in Canada today that are Amazon Prime customer than they are enrolled in a traditional cable TV package. So I don't think there's any harm trying it. And, you know, we've seen Facebook do it in the past couple of years where they've been broadcasting localized Major League Baseball streams. We've seen TSN, or we've seen Twitter broadcasting NFL. Like, there's no harm here trying it. I just always believed, and I don't know if it was you, I was talking about this, like, I always just thought that there could have been some symmetry between Netflix and Formula One. And it's been speculated for many years that Netflix might get into the live sports broadcasting. And given that they already have a relatively strong partnership, I always thought that kind of made sense. But ultimately, I would be excited to see this as well. And I think for some fans as well, this is a way to circumvent the paywall. So in a lot of countries where Formula One has historically been free over the air, if you look in Germany and if you look in the UK, Formula One is now behind a paywall. Like, you have to subscribe to Sky to get it. So kind of cool. I like it. I like it a lot.
Well, the thing is too that the thing that I found intriguing about Amazon is when you look at what they have available on Amazon Prime, it's not Netflix. Let's be
no way, not even close.
But the thing is that what I see when I look at Amazon Prime, that there's a lot of good content there. but a lot of potential. I mean, if they were to, I think that they've got something really positive to work with. I mean, they're coming into the game obviously a lot further down the line than Netflix. I mean, they're the granddaddy of it. You know, they're sort of the benchmark that everything else is measured against. And then you know, I mean, Amazon is obviously uber successful in other areas, and just based on what they've done, it, you know, I have to believe at some point that this whole Amazon streaming thing is going to really take off, and whether or not it rivals Netflix, that remains to be seen. But there certainly is, you know, quite a lot of room for growth on that platform for sure.
I'll just add one thing as well. You're absolutely right. It's not Netflix, and I don't know that they necessarily want it to be Netflix. In a lot of ways, Amazon Prime Video is a marketplace. Like there's free content on there, but there's also rentals, and there's also the ability to bolt on other premium streaming services. And I think for F1, like, hey, you know what? If we throw a couple of free races on Amazon Prime, but we also bolt on the F1 TV Pro app, maybe that's a way to get some additional subs, because we, just to your point, we expose some people to races that might not traditionally see it, make a few free, give people a bit of a test, and then we give them a pathway to bolt on the F1 TV Pro app to their existing Amazon Prime Video account. Like maybe there's something there. I know we've got to jump to a commercial, but I think the last kind of exciting update is Formula One announced, and again, if we're going to talk about this later, I apologize, but Formula One announced that they've done some pretty significant tinkering under the hood of the F1 TV Pro app this year. A couple of big improvements that we're going to see are Android users are going to be able to Chromecast the content natively to your TV. And for the first time, iOS users are going to be able to AirPlay the content. So today, for me, last season, and this sucked, the only way I could see the content on my TV is if I did screen sharing, which is a garbage experience.
Yeah.
This year, going to natively. And then the other exciting thing, too, is Formula One also announced that they're working on a native Apple TV app, which they're hoping to launch before the end of the season, and a native Android TV app. So a couple of cool things coming down the pipeline. And for the first time, they're going to be broadcasting the content in true 1080p at 50 frames per second. So in prior years, it was a heavily compressed 720p stream. This year's going to be true 1080p, which will actually beat out what you'd be getting over the air with your HD cable box or your HT satellite box, which are all 720p streams. So super excited about that.
Yeah, absolutely. That should be really, really cool. And really loving the fact that they're going to come out with like the Apple TV and the Android apps. I think that's a great, great move. We never would have seen that under you know, Bernie Ecclestone, but we've been there, but we've been there before. Anyways, time for a quick break here on the Overtime Media Network. Don't go away. We'll be back in just a moment. All right. Well, welcome back to the show. You're joining Mark Daly and Mark Hamilton again. There, I almost got that out somewhat, well, almost not awkwardly, but hey, it's been a busy week. I'm almost keeping my mind together in one piece. So let's go for a little bit of sanity, and well, maybe that's the best way to talk about this one. But anyways, Silverstone is going to host one of the sprint races. Formula One CEO Stefano Domenicali confirmed earlier this week, and I think this is a really an interesting thing. I mean, we talked about the concept a couple of shows ago about the, you know, these majors. You know, we have like these sprint races, the Friday qualifying, the Saturday sprint race, the main event on Sunday. You know, I've really come to like that idea, and I'm really excited to see how this is going to work. You know, I know that there's a lot of different opinions out there in the paddock. I mean, some people seem pretty welcoming towards it. Some seem very critical. A lot of people say, yeah, it seems pretty good, but we're going to need to tweak it. But I think that this is the ideal time to actually go and try it. I was a little bit skeptical about it, maybe a month or two ago, but I've really warmed up to the idea. And this is, I don't want to say this is a throwaway year, because it absolutely isn't. I mean, this is going to be a regular championship, but I mean, all eyes are on 2022, the new formula, the new cars, everything that's going to come in for next year. And of course, that's what we're all excited about. But I mean, if you're going into this new era of Formula One, and you're kind of in the last year of this prolonged formula that we've seen kind of extended over the past several years from 2017 until now, that this seems like the perfect time to trial these sprint races, these majors, if you want to call them that, with the ultimate idea of ironing it out and getting a good working format going into this brand new fancy shiny era with brand new fancy cars, new size tires, and everything like that. going into the season in 2022. What are your thoughts?
Oh, dude, I'm so excited. And again, like you, I was a little cautious originally going back to January, but I'm so pumped. And I think the expectation was that we were probably going to see a sprint race in Montreal, Monza, and Sao Paulo. And to put one in Silverstone is incredibly exciting. And I think about what that weekend looks like, right? Like a traditional Grand Prix weekend is you have a couple of practice sessions on Friday, nobody's watching. You have a practice session on Saturday morning, midday, nobody's watching. Then you have qualifying on Saturday night, and then you have the race midday Saturday. So you kind of compress the weekend into this like 18-hour, 24-hour period. And ultimately, no one's watching free practice. Some people are watching qualifying, and then everyone watches the Grand Prix. But you think about it now, like the potential is that you have qualifying on a Friday night. So primetime Friday night, qualifying on primetime Friday night. Then you have the sprint race on Saturday. Then you have the race weekend, the Grand Prix on the Sunday. Like that is must-watch TV 3 days in a row. And that's a huge boon to the sport because it draws eyeballs to the TV. But the other thing that it could potentially do as well is sell packages, sell tickets, right? Like when you're buying Grand Prix weekend tickets, like you can buy race tickets for the entire weekend. So you can go every single day, walk around, see the paddock, see the sessions, blah, 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 blah. Ultimately, everyone buys tickets for the Sunday. Nobody's there for free practice. But now you also have this potential where you could charge a premium because, hey, we can do a 3-package deal. You can see qualifying, you see the sprint race, you see the Grand Prix. Either way, this is a really smart business decision for the sport because it gives fans more reasons to tune in on the Friday where no one's tuning in today. Again, on Saturday when you've got qualifying, but in this case, it's a sprint race, so it's going to be even more exciting. And then, of course, on the Saturday for the Grand Prix. So I don't think this is going to take away from the Grand Prix. And I think as far as the drivers were concerned, that's what their concern was. Like, will the sprint race detract from the Grand Prix? And I don't think it will. And, we heard last week as well that Formula One has decided, and I don't know if this is official, but it's at least understood that there won't be a podium for the sprint race. There'll be no formal celebration because, again, they don't want to detract or devalue the Grand Prix celebration on the Sunday, but super freaking pumped, man. Like, this is going to be awesome. Like, I just think about that major weekend, qualifying on a Friday night, sprint race on the Saturday, Grand Prix on the Sunday. Gives us a ton to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. And, to be kind of completely honest, the last time that we went to a race, we went to the Spanish Grand Prix. We'd never been to Barcelona before, and it's a wonderful city. It's a fantastic place to go and visit. And we had passes for the entire weekend, so Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I guess Thursday, there's the ability to walk around to the paddock. You got the practice sessions on Friday. So, we were only there. I think we were there, the entire time, 5 or 6 days. It was basically the race was right in the middle of our stay. And we got to Barcelona, we found out what an awesome, the place this was. And we realized we only have 5, 6, 7 days, whatever it was now, I can't remember. And realized, okay, well, at least 2 of these days are going to be completely taken up by going to the track, watching the race, which was, of course, the reason why we were there. But, if you have you change up that format, all of a sudden, if you're flying into a race somewhere, you're completely reevaluating how you're going to spend your time. But also, for everybody that's watching at home, of course, now all of a sudden, okay, well, if there's some highlights or something worthwhile that you could maybe go back and see if there was some video from the Friday, like practice sessions or something. Yeah, that's maybe interesting. But now you replace that with a qualifying session. You got the sprint race on Saturday, like you say, that becomes appointment television. You're booking off that hour. You're blocking that 1 hour off on a Friday night to watch the qualifying. You're blocking off that 1 hour, which you would you spent anyways to watch qualifying on Saturday and Sunday. I'm getting excited just talking about it. It just it adds more interest, more excitement over the course of 3 days, rather than that 1 hour on Saturday and then the full 2 hours on Sunday afternoon. I think it really highlights the interest and gives you a reason to watch.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And if I'm the drivers, I want to get behind this because this could be potential leverage to fight back against a driver salary cap, right? Like if you're going to ask more of us and we're going to start putting sprint races and we're going to go through the strain and the stress of preparing and competing, like this could be just negotiating leverage to fight back against the concept of a driver salary cap. And maybe that's already set in stone. I don't know. But if I'm the drivers, I'm embracing this because one, it's a cash opportunity for me. It's more exposure for me. It's more exposure for my sponsors. it's ultimately a good thing. I think what I'm really curious about is, one, we don't yet know what the prize points allocations would be, if any, because it's also possible that we run the sprint races this season without any points allocated. Maybe it's just a cash deal, but we also don't know what the payout would look like in terms of cash prizes for drivers and constructors. So a lot that's not yet understood.
Yeah, well, that was actually one of the complaints of Andrew Green, who's the technical director at Aston Martin, and said, they want to see a bunch of directives or regulations, and all they've really had is a bunch of proposals. And I can understand that. I think if you're in Formula One, you need like a framework to work within. But this is something that's still developing. They're still, I think, trying to figure it out, work it out among themselves. And I think it's maybe a little bit too early in the game to have, okay, this set of parameters, this is how it's going to look. I think it's going to evolve over these 3 test weekends to see how it works. And then if, they're going to actually go ahead and implement it for 22, then after these, we get these 3 weekends under our belt, then they'll know, okay, this worked, this didn't, this was good. But, if we make a couple of tweaks here and here, then it should be a lot better. And once you have that data, once you have those experiences under your belt, then you can develop it further, codify it, put it into, a certain format. And then, as long as you don't have like a disastrous rollout like we did with that bizarre qualifying rule in the format back, when was that, in 2016 or whatever, which they scrapped after only a couple of races and went back to the traditional, Q1, Q2, and Q3 format, which actually works pretty good. But looking forward to see how it definitely gets rolled out. Now, I just wanted to talk about this one because this is something we've talked about a couple of times over the past several months, Mark. And this is the whole We Race is One thing, the whole diversity initiative that Formula One has undertaken. So they've explained how that they want to implement this university scholarship plan to help get people from underrepresented backgrounds into the sport, help them to complete degree programs and things like that. And it's part of their push for diversity. And my initial reaction to this was, okay, that's great, but I really hope that this is executed properly. I mean, I'm kind of really not sold on the whole We Race is One thing. I mean, it looks really good from sort of a PR campaign, but in practice, I don't know how it's really been sort of rolled out. And I applaud them for saying that they do want to see more underrepresented segments of the population represented in the sport, because I think anybody that looks at Formula One, I think they just see a bunch of like very, very rich white guys going out and racing motor cars, right? And I mean, it has that very, very 1% feel to it, right? And certainly, I mean, it is a sport that could definitely use, a major dose of diversity to represent the population and cultures and countries as a whole. I just don't, I guess basically what I'm trying to say, I need to be convinced to see, is this actually going to be what they, say it's going to be?
Yeah, 100%. And it's funny because when I saw this article, I'm like, you know what? On the surface, this is great, but is this just a PR play? And you know what? I was a huge supporter of the Black Lives Matter movement last year. Initially, I was pretty enthusiastic that Formula One was embracing it. I still think they were doing it more as a PR play than anything early on. They quickly abandoned it as the season went on. And in this case here, like, this is a great initiative if it's meaningful and it's sustainable. If you're going to throw a couple of cash tuitions at a couple of lucky kids and then move on, that's garbage. That's a PR play. But if this is a sustainable, meaningful endeavor, that's fantastic. But what I can't determine is, how many scholarships are they handing out? How much money are they reserving for this program? Like, I don't know how meaningful this is, but I think it's absolutely the right thing, because you know what? I'm sitting here as a white guy that's so late in his 30s, he's scientifically in his 40s. And even I feel Formula One is too white. Like, it's uncomfortably white. And, most of the emerging demographics globally aren't traditionally white Europeans like we are, people of white European descent. And I don't think Formula One does a good enough job of reflecting its future and emerging audience. And this is a great way to do that, is by encouraging and giving people that have the skills and the capacity to succeed in this field the opportunity to do so. You reach out, you find these folks, and you give them that financial passport so they can make the journey. The other piece I want to add on this, and we haven't talked about this, but I am very, very excited that the W Series has been added as an official support series to Formula One this year at 8 races. I was very excited when the W Series began in 2019. It was great to see it evolve a little bit last year. Hopefully it's going to bounce back post-COVID this year in a meaningful way. That's cool. I think the challenge is, and a lot of people, like a lot of my friends and people I interact with, they always ask like, hey, when are we going to see a female driver? Like, when are we going to see a female driver in Formula One? It's going to be in our lifetime, but it's not going to be this generation. And the reason I say that is that it's the way that they've kind of approached this is tough. You've kind of built the upper echelon of a race series devoted to nurturing female drivers, but you don't have any infrastructure below that. You don't have a grassroots feeder system. You're not encouraging young girls and young women to get into the sport, but you kind of built at the top, which is good, but it's going to take 5, 10, or 15 years to kind of build that feeder infrastructure so you can start developing those kids when they're 5, 6, 7, just like you did with Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen and all these other drivers. So I think they're moving in the right direction, but I'm very confident that not even within our lifetime, but probably within the next 15 to 20 years, we'll see a competitive woman racing in Formula One, and hopefully more. You know, we've seen women successful or at least competitive in open wheel racing before, especially in kart back in the late 2000s. We obviously saw Danica Patrick in Japan a number of years ago. Like clearly the capabilities there. We just need to build the grassroots infrastructure support network to give them the opportunity to start racing and being nurtured at that younger age. But all of this said, if F1 wants to invest in scholarships, you know what, do it in a meaningful way. Share how many scholarships, share the amount of capital that you're putting aside, because I think this is the right move. I just hope it's not a publicity move.
Yeah, so do I. And Mark, I think this is a good place to stop just for another break, maybe a little bit ahead of schedule, because I want to dive into something now that you really picked up on. I thought it was a rather astute observation, and that was the whole Lewis Hamilton contract distraction. Is exactly the word that you used on the last show, was distraction. So we'll get into that right after this commercial break. So don't go away. We'll be back in just a moment. All right. Well, welcome back to the show. And just before the break there, I hinted at the fact that that you had really picked up on this a couple of days ago when we did the previous episode. I really felt that at the time, and you really turned me around on the issue, that I felt that the Lewis thing wasn't going to be a distraction. You said no. I believe that it is, and I've come to I'm admitting it now. I'm going to eat a little slice of humble pie here, because here we are only a couple of days later. The first article that jumped out that said, the headline is "Mercedes has no doubts on Hamilton's F1 commitment," and this is just one of a couple of stories that have kind of been bubbling up through the surface here over the past couple of days, and we haven't even got there yet to the first race of the year. I mean, the ink is hardly even dry on the deal that he just signed, and let's face it. I mean, and you've really turned me around on the issue that. Yeah, I mean, as soon as it broke that he'd only signed a 1-year deal, this just seems like it's going to be it's just going to follow him all the way around. I mean, he may have put it out out of the back of his mind for the time being, and he may say that it's not going to be a distraction, but it really is just going to follow him every step of the way. It's going to be there. Every media session is going to be there at every race. And obviously, as soon as you hop online, it's right there. You can't hide from it.
You look back at what you and I were talking about in November and December leading up to the contract, like, is he going to sign? When's he going to sign? Is he going to sign? When's he going to sign? It's going to be the same thing this whole year. Plus, it's going to be like, why did Mercedes not commit to 2 years? And you know what? You sent me a great link earlier, and I'm going to quote Hamilton here. "I just wanted 1 year," says Hamilton. "Then we could talk about if we do more and keep adding to it if we do." Garbage. Absolutely garbage. Any driver that's 35 years old is going to want as much security as possible. The thing about Formula One is it's not like professional sports in North America where contracts are governed by a collective bargaining agreement. In Formula One, the teams can do whatever they want. They can be as creative as they want with the contracts. If I'm Hamilton, if I want flexibility, awesome. Give me a 1-year deal with a driver option and another driver option. So you know what? I have that security for 2 or 3 years, but I also have the flexibility to opt out of the contract and let the team pursue other options. Like if that's what he really wanted was flexibility, you know what? Convince Mercedes in total to give you a deal that's 1 + 1 with an option. Like, I don't know why they didn't do that. Like, he's saying he wants flexibility. I'm sure you do, but you could have had that with the security of being able to opt out of a second or opt out of a third year deal. Like, I don't understand. And I think he's talking out of the side of his mouth because he's saying what he needs to say to protect the team. But obviously this isn't the deal he want, or isn't the deal that he wanted. And I don't know if it's because they were so far apart in terms of the value, the annual value of the contract that he wanted to have. I don't know why we didn't end up, and I think we're probably going to hear more and more about it, but I think you're absolutely right. Every single media session, every single scrum, every single podcast, from now until he re-signs in December, we're going to be talking about this. And the speculation will increase more if he has a tough season, and it's going to intensify even more if he has a great season. Like, it's just, the team has put him in a tough position. I shouldn't say the team has put him in a tough position because ultimately they may have offered more. It just may not have been with the annual value that he wanted. And again, this is what happens. Like, now here you and I are speculating, like, he only signed this contract. Like you said, the ink is still drying and we're already like crazy speculating about why it wasn't longer. So yeah, this is a mess. And I think it's going to be really challenging for the Mercedes PR team to kind of stick handle throughout the course of the season.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think this was also interesting as well. Was the quote that I saw from his teammate Valtteri Bottas this week, who says he's in no rush to discuss a new Mercedes contract.
Yeah, because no one,
like. I thought it was cute.
I love the way you put that. It's cute because ultimately you have no leverage in that conversation, and you're just sitting by your phone every single night in your trailer, like, please, Toto, please call me and talk about a contract, because I don't think he's going to get one. So he can say those niceties. I don't think there's going to be a contract offered for him.
Yeah, I really think that, I don't want to say he's kind of reached the end of the line there. I mean, he's done an exceptional job. He's done exactly what they needed him to do when he was there. I mean, he's been able to win some races. He's been driving the best car in Formula One. And, he's been right there at the front for the past several years. So, I mean, it was a great move for him. I mean, I'm sure that when that move happened after Rosberg retired at the end of 2016, was just obviously was unexpected on many fronts. And I mean, it just worked out phenomenally well. I mean, but the one thing that still just I find interesting is that it's always been a 1-year deal, It's just, there's been this rolling 1-year deal over the past 4 seasons. And at some point, it has to come to an end, right?
I agree. I got to say, though, that when that move happened, like, I wasn't at the Mercedes factory surrounded by those 800 people, but I feel like when that signing happened, the pressure that must have been taking off of everyone's shoulder, because I think the intensity of the relationship between Hamilton and Rosberg and the fact that it kept culminating in these physical on-track incidents, like, I think the tension at that factory was through the roof. It wasn't sustainable. And I think when they brought Bottas in, everyone could sigh a deep breath, right? Like, I think everyone felt better. But, again, Bottas has been on these 1 years every single time. He hasn't had a lot of security, but I think, to your point, I think his run is done. But at the same time, he's done everything that they asked him to do. We just need you to help us win a constructors. We don't need you to win a driver's title. We just need you to help us win a constructors title. And he's done that. So I don't think they can complain about what he's delivered. But I think at 31, turning 32 this year, turning 33 next year, especially if you've got a talented young driver like George Russell, like, at some point you have to make that move, because as we discussed last week, if you don't make that move with George Russell heading into 2022, you lose him as an option. And then what do? Do you keep Valtteri Bottas indefinitely? It's not a good business decision.
Yeah, especially when it comes to like succession planning in a top team like that. You don't really want to plan your long-term future around 2 drivers. One that's already in his mid-30s, and another guy, like you just nailed. You nailed it, saying he's going into his mid-30s right now, and some of these hot young prospects like George Russell might not be available. All right, well, let's move on to the next one. And I thought this was an interesting quote from Sebastian Vettel. And this is going to take a little bit kind of getting used to. Aston Martin driver Sebastian Vettel. But I think it was really interesting because he was asked about the fact that Aston Martin is a Mercedes customer team. And there were some questions about the fact that they want to become title contenders over the next 3 to 5 year period. Anyways, I'll just read you the quote. Seb had to say the following quote: "I'm not worried about that. I think your fears are old school. The world has moved on. I think in the past, probably you were right. With somebody like Mercedes, I think we can trust that you get a very fair treatment. And if you are faster, then you are allowed to beat them. As I said, this is the sort of mindset that is way out of date. As a principal, I see where you're coming from, but I'm not worried. If we are very, very close to Mercedes, then that is a good achievement. So it would be the last thing I would worry about, end quote. So that is interesting. And I mean, I don't think that I just can't see a world where a customer team would not be allowed to compete with with Mercedes. I mean, certainly within the team. I mean, we've seen team orders. That's nothing new in Formula One, but I mean, I could see maybe back in the day if a Ferrari, and especially if old man Ferrari Enzo was still around, and let's just say that one of his cars was being threatened to be passed by one of the Alphas or one of the Hasses or something like that, then I'm pretty sure that there would be something like that. But I just can't see it in this day and age how they could interfere and impose team orders on a customer team. But he does raise a really, really good point, and I think it will be fascinating to see that Aston Martin, as a customer Mercedes team running one of the Mercedes power units in the back of their car, how it's going to match up against the Mercedes works teams themselves. And I think that Seb nails it when he said that if we are as good as or quicker than Mercedes, and that's a very, very good thing. So, I mean, we definitely saw some flashes from Racing Point last year. I mean, with the whole pink Mercedes controversy, but now when they go into this new era as a works team, well, I mean, it's kind of interesting. I mean, they're not like, I mean, they're works Aston Martin team, but they're a customer team because they don't have an Aston Martin engine in the back. It is a Mercedes. So they're kind of in a bit of a kind of a gray spot. I mean, they're not really one nor the other. So it's going to be an interesting story to watch.
I'm sorry, I'm just distracted by this photo of Sebastian Vettel in an Aston Martin Formula One car at Silverstone. And we've all seen this photo, but it's still so good, especially with the engine bulge that we talked about last week. Oh, the car looks so good. You know, it's funny too, because when I saw this title, I thought it was more about the functional ability of a customer team to win a title versus a customer team being enabled to win a title relative to the demands of the partner team, the team that they're buying the engines from. And it's funny too, because I'm trying to think back now throughout the entire turbo hybrid era. I think that win that Racing Point had last winter in Bahrain, was that the first and only time a Mercedes customer team has won a race in the hybrid era?
I think it probably would have been.
Yeah, it's interesting, but I also don't believe that Mercedes would have any issue. Like I think if Aston Martin was to come out and put a more competitive car on the track, I think they would internalize that as we didn't do a good enough job developing our car. And at the end of the day, I think ultimately they're going to be thrilled that any team with their power unit in the back of that car is successful. Is a good story for them. I also read a really, and by the way, I don't know if I did, but I'm gonna link it out on Twitter. I read a really good story the other day that kind of broke down the breakdown in the relationship between McLaren, who was functionally the Mercedes works team prior to 2010, and that relationship. But yeah, I think I agree with Vettel. I think it's kind of old school thinking that Mercedes is going to come down hard on Aston Martin because they're beating them potentially in the Constructors' Championship. I think that's nonsense.
Yeah, that just doesn't compute for me either. But that's a bit of a mind-blowing stat that probably would have been the only time that a Mercedes customer team had won a race in the turbo hybrid era. I mean, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I mean, there was certainly a lot of races that have been won by Mercedes themselves, and I mean a sprinkling of race wins. I mean, Ferrari's obviously won quite a few. Well, I mean, not over the past 2 seasons, but prior to that, I mean, 2016, 17, 18, they had some pretty strong runs in there at certain times. 2018 was pretty good, and then 2019, I mean, there's obviously a big asterisk beside that season, the whole power unit controversy there. But
totally. And don't forget as well that Red Bull was relatively competitive with the Renault engine for a few years. So there were a few years where Red Bull was winning races with a Renault engine and Renault wasn't getting anywhere near a podium, right? So I think that would probably be the closest modern equivalency to what Vettel's speaking about. And clearly Renault had no problem with Red Bull winning podiums because at least somebody was being competitive with their power unit.
No, I mean the issue that that Renault had with Red Bull was the fact that they were always moaning and whining about what competitive that the Renault engine was, but yet they were still able to win the odd race here and there. I mean, obviously they came out of an era prior to the V6 turbo hybrid era where they were dominating Formula One with the Renault engine. So I mean that moaning and whining is obviously understandable to a certain point. Anyways, I want to take another quick break here, Mark, and then when we come back, I want to stick with Aston Martin. And not only am I not used to seeing Sebastian Vettel in that car, but this other picture that I'm looking at of him right now, all dressed up in British racing green, that's going to take a little bit of getting used to as well. But anyways, we'll talk about that in just a moment here on the Overtime Media Network. So don't go away. We'll be back in just a moment. All right. Well, welcome back to the podcast. As always, up to speed with Formula One, and we are breaking down all the latest news. And this next story I wanted to discuss, I think, is really quite interesting. There's a couple of different quotes that I've seen around, but Sebastian Vettel, going into this season, his first year with Aston Martin here in 2021, feels he doesn't have anything to prove to all the critics out there, and there's been a lot of them who wrote him off, especially after what was a pretty dire year last year at Ferrari. And he said, quote, "I'm not interested in what people think," end quote. Well, I mean, that certainly sounds, at least on the surface, about a guy that doesn't feel like he gives a bleep about what people are saying. I mean, I don't think that necessarily he does have something to prove, but I think he doesn't need to prove it in terms. Well, maybe he does. I mean, I think he still believes that he's got another championship in him. But I think at least at this point, going into this year one of the new Aston Martin project, I think that the focus is not going to be on Sebastian Vettel being a title contender. I mean, if he turns out to be in the title race this year, I think that's a completely different story. But I think I kind of understand where he's coming from on this.
Yeah, let me ask you a question, because this is the way I look at this. This was a driver who was supremely successful in the V8 era with Red Bull. He ran off 4 straight world championships. Unbelievable run. He concludes his time at Red Bull as they're kind of making that transition to the V6 turbo hybrid. 2014 is a write-off. He goes to Ferrari. He doesn't win a title. Ferrari implodes in 2018 when they had a legit shot. 2019 was bad. 2020 was a disaster, and that may have been artificial because of some things that we've talked about over the last couple of weeks. But do you feel that his era with Ferrari has potentially tarnished his legacy? Will people look back in 10 years from now, when they talk about Sebastian Vettel, do they just look back and associate him with his success at Red Bull? Or is that Ferrari story always going to be part of his legacy, that he went to the big bad Ferrari and couldn't deliver, and in 2018 imploded, and then Charles Leclerc came and became the dominant driver, and then 2020 was a disaster? Like, how do you think the Ferrari experience shapes the narrative that is his legacy?
Yeah, that is an interesting one. I mean, that's certainly something I've really thought about a lot, and I think definitely it's taken a bit of the shine off of his career. I mean, especially when Charles came in 2019 and was competitive right off of the bat, right from the very first race. When, I mean, it was obvious in Australia that they implemented team orders, because I mean, Seb was not as fast as Charles was even in that race. And then you go to Bahrain. I mean, he should have won that race if he didn't have the mechanical gremlins.
Yep.
And if we didn't have that bizarre double Renault, DNF right at the last couple of laps that brought out that safety car, he wouldn't have even been on the podium. So, I mean, that was there right from the very beginning. And that controversy, that discussion kind of, that went all season long, right up until Monza, when you had on the opening lap, Sebastian spun out, I think it was in the Ascari curve, then collected Lance when he came back onto the track. And then Charles goes on and he wins the Italian Grand Prix for the first time in, 20 years or something?
Yeah.
Fighting off not just Lewis Hamilton, but Valtteri Bottas. I mean, you had both the Mercedes boys, tag teaming him all race long. And there was no more discussion at that point that was not Seb's team anymore. But I mean, obviously there was going to be a little bit of time to kind of settle into the team. The first year or two, they were sort of on the rise again. Certainly in 2017, there were signs that maybe something special was happening. And then 2018, it looked like it was on. It looked like that these were it was going to happen. It looked like they had a legit shot to win the championship, maybe 2 championships that year. And then, like you say, I mean, in that last third of the season after the summer break, it really just imploded. I mean, he had a really, really good race. It was in Spa, wasn't it, that he beat Lewis Hamilton? And then Singapore happened, and then there was just there was too many of those moments that I think he's been a little bit renowned for over the past a year or two, where he's collected other drivers or done things that you wouldn't expect a guy that's been right up at the pinnacle, right up at the top there, make these sorts of things. So I mean, he's going to have those critics. I mean, certainly he may feel that he doesn't have anything to prove to them. But I guess it really, I think, if you're Sebastian Vettel, is just, I think you have to ask yourself, like, what are you trying to prove? Like, are you trying to prove you're still good enough to be in Formula One? Are you trying to prove that you're still, a title contender? I mean, there's, I think it's kind of a vague statement. Yeah, I mean, you can say those things, but there's a number of different ways you can split that one.
Yeah, I really agree with what you're saying. And obviously 2015, 2016, they were relatively transitional years when he came to Ferrari. And I think he would be excused for his performances those 2 years, because Mercedes was just off the chart performance-wise. Yeah. Off the chart, downforce, traction, power delivery, everything about those cars was absolutely unbeatable. But I think you make a great point. Like, you look at 17, he's right there up until Singapore, and then it all falls apart. And then in 2018, he's right there until maybe the last third, the last quarter of the season, and then he just drops off. And I think it was disappointing, because you're right, like, they could have won 2 championships in 2018, not just the one. And then, like you said, 2019 was a disaster, not just because of his on-track performance, but because of the very public relationship with Leclerc. And again, it wasn't a Nico Hamilton level of venom and vitriol and poison and toxicity, but it wasn't good. And 2020 was a disaster for all the reasons that we've spoken about. And I talked about this last week, like, Aston Martin is this unbelievable opportunity for him to resurrect his career and his legacy. And I don't think he needs to win a championship to do that, because I don't think anyone reasonably expects that this car and this team is going to win a championship. But if he can be competitive and he can win a race or win 2 races or collect a handful of podiums, I think that will go a long way to massaging and glossing over what we saw during those last couple of years at Ferrari.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. But, it really would make a compelling story if we see like a Braun-like performance from Aston Martin this year. It would, honestly, it would be a feel-good story. I think it would be a great story for Formula One if they came out and did in 2021 that Braun GP did way back in 2009. I mean, because that was astounding. I mean, nobody expected them to do what they did. And I mean, Jensen rode that all the way to a world championship. And I mean, it was such an outlier, and was such an unexpected thing that happened that year. I mean, it's just one of those moments in modern Formula One that, if I say 2009 Formula One World Championship, 2009 season, what is the first thing that's going to pop into your mind? Is that beautiful Braun car with the white paint on it, with the black and that sort of lime green trim on it. And just how phenomenal that car was, and just like literally they caught everybody by surprise. I mean,
the absolute best thing that could happen to Formula One this year is somebody that other than Mercedes wins the championship. Yeah. The absolute best thing that could happen for the sport. And I think the team that's maybe primed to make that run is possibly an Aston Martin. They have the right power unit. They've made the right investments in the car. They have a world championship driver. Like, it would be the best possible narrative and story. Like, hey, the Mercedes dominance is over, heading into a new era. You have this resurgent team. Like, it would be it would be the best possible case. Like I want it and I pray for it because it's good for the longevity of the sport. We just don't need, the sport doesn't need another dominant performance from Mercedes, because Tim Hauraney, who's a media personality in Canada, does a lot of official F1 coverage. He's F1 accredited. He has a great relationship with a number of F1 drivers. His biggest fear is F1's done this really great job of nurturing this new demo and this new base of F1 fans. His biggest fear is that we turn them off really quickly. They come in, they see this sport for 3 years, and they see nothing but Ferrari dominance, a lack of parity, a lack of competition, and we lose them again. So his fear is that we don't turn it around quickly enough, and we turn off all these people we brought into the sport. So we talk about the Drive to Survive generation. I think it's a novelty, right? Like the first couple of years, like, yeah, Mercedes, they're just the good team. But by year 3, it's like, this is it. They just win every single race. Like, that's not a good story either.
No. I was also thinking too. We have to come up with a good name for for those people, like Netflixials.
Yeah.
It doesn't roll off the tongue very well, but yeah, no. I mean that's obviously a very legitimate point. That it could be very repetitive, and if you're new to the sport and you've come in with the expectations. And I mean, the job that they've done to really present Formula One really puts it in a very appealing and very attractive way. But I mean, if all the results and they're not winning 23 races out of 23 races every year, but I mean they're still winning a significant portion of the races that we have on the schedule. So yeah, that would be really turning things off. But the other thing I was thinking of too is when you're just saying to be this great story about Aston Martin. They also have the Mercedes engines, but I was also thinking you also have McLaren in the background thinking, hey guys, we have Mercedes power too. What about us? But
yeah.
It really is interesting to see where they might be in terms of Mercedes and Aston Martin, but kind of based on the what we saw at times last year from the Racing Point RP20, that maybe if there was the potential for a team to kind of maybe come out of left field to a certain extent, that maybe that Racing Point / Aston Martin maybe has a bit of a shot at that.
I think it's funny. I've been thinking a lot about this. I think, and we talked about this right off the top, I think that the 3-day winter testing is going to be really problematic for McLaren. They need as much time on track as possible. They've just wedged a Mercedes power unit into a car that was effectively designed for a Renault power unit.
Yeah.
Now, we saw a team work miracles in 2009 with the Braun car, but ultimately, I think that team's going to be the one that struggles. But you know what could be really, really helpful to Aston Martin this year is if we saw a resurgent Ferrari. If you had a resurgent Ferrari and suddenly you had 3 or maybe 4 teams that were fighting over championship points and fighting for podiums, like it could be conceivable that the best possible outcome for Aston Martin is if that it becomes a 4-way race, that you have 4 teams fighting for podiums and fighting for championship points. Because I say 4-way because, Red Bull won some races last year with that Honda power unit. They're going to win a couple of races this year, especially with the lengthened schedule. I think to increase the parity at the top would possibly be a good thing, because I think 1 for 1, I don't think Aston Martin has enough to compete with Mercedes over the course of a schedule. But if you throw in a wild card that is Ferrari, anything's possible. So, yeah.
Yeah, Ferrari, I think calling them the wild card for this year is such a brilliant way to put it, because they are the big question mark. They are the great unknown, because I mean, that little slip that Mika Salo made in that extreme thing the other week. I mean, it's the thing that I find so interesting about that. What was the fact that he said that they had this artificial penalty imposed on them in the form of this restricted fuel map. And but that was, I mean, fascinating the way that just sort of slipped out in the conversation. But the wall of silence, the silence just surrounding that has been deafening. It's like nobody said, that it didn't happen. Nobody's tried to discredit him. It's sort of very quietly become like a non-issue, which it was something that could have been. I mean, it was something that we thought was extremely explosive. It's just like, well, really? Is there something to this? Anyone? Hello? And it's just crickets. It's crickets everywhere.
So I tried to do a little bit of digging on that one. And what I've learned is that it was an open secret within F1 circles that the teams knew and a lot of the media knew. But the media, in an effort to protect their position within the sport, didn't want to report on it, and haven't wanted to ask those questions. So unless they're boxed into a corner, they're not going to address it, because to your point, I thought it was going to lead to a flurry of questions from the media. Like, what? Is this true? Is this true? Is this true? But by all accounts, it was a relatively open secret amongst the teams and the media. And, I've talked about this before. The F1 media is very insular. They travel with the teams. There's only 10 teams. There's only 21 or 20 drivers. They desperately need all the access that they can get to be effective when it comes to covering the sport. And they don't want to burn bridges, and they don't want to burn relationships. And they're not going to put themselves into a position where they could potentially lose access. And the understanding is there was a threat that they could if they reported on this. So people have tried to, and not to be too conspiratorial, but I honestly believe, like, especially if you look at the F1 media, they don't ask a lot of hard-edged questions. They let some more pressing issues die. And I think it's just because they don't want to lose their access. But I think it was an open secret, and people don't want to press that one because they don't want to upset Ferrari. So I think it's a well-known thing. And I think we'll be proven right if they come out today in a couple of minutes and they're super competitive and they start putting down crazy lap times. We'll know right away, like, hey, they didn't just recover this power through aerodynamics. Like, it was there last year. It was just artificially restrained through an engine map.
Okay, well, we're going to take one final break here on the show, and while we do that, I'm going to go and get the tinfoil and sit here and rant on about mainstream media conspiracy theories. So we'll have a little bit of fun with that, but just joking. Anyways, we will take one final break here on the show, and then when we come back, there's still a couple of topics to talk about, and where better to start than Ferrari conspiracy theories than to actually talk about Ferrari themselves, and we'll do that in just a moment. So don't go away. We'll be right back. All right, well, welcome back to the show. And yes, just a couple more stories to get to before the end of the show. And Charles Leclerc said that he's spent more time than he ever has done before over the past couple of years at Ferrari, at the factory in Maranello, in his preparations before the season. And you know what? I know he's a young guy, but he is the man. He's the guy at Ferrari. And, that's what you got to do. You got to put in the work. You got to put in all that effort and everything like that. And I mean, if he wants to be, competitive at Ferrari, if he wants to be a world champion, I mean, these are just the sort of things that you have to do. Work with the engineers, get in the simulator, do all these different things. Play Formula One the way that Michael Schumacher did, right? That just to attack it from all those different things, from working with your engineers, the fitness, whatever it is, you live, eat, breathe, sleep Formula One. And if that means throwing up a cot in the corner of the factory at Maranello, then to win a world championship, then maybe that's just what Charles needs to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't have a lot to add here other than the fact that, we talk a lot about Sebastian Vettel and his time with Ferrari. Let me be very clear that nobody ever challenged his commitment to that team. Nobody ever challenged the amount of time he put on the simulator, the amount of time he dedicated to his fitness, the amount of time he put with his engineers and the mechanics. He put in everything that he had, just like he did at Red Bull. And I think you're absolutely right. If Charles Leclerc wasn't doing that, he better be doing it, and he shouldn't be praised for doing it. Like, my expectation is that if you're a Formula One driver, one of 20 in the world, and you're racing for Ferrari, that should just be an absolute expectation. And you need to do it because you are the de facto #1 driver, and you also need to set the standard for Carlos Sainz because he needs to follow in your footsteps. But I don't think he needs to be praised for this. I think it just needs to be the expectation. And I'm sure he worked hard last year, but especially in the absence of Sebastian Vettel, the team needs him to be laser focused because they need him to be able to understand every single possible driving dynamic of that car, because he needs to be the one feeding them feedback so they can improve it over the season.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, I don't want to take away or make any suggestions, otherwise about Charles Leclerc, but I mean, that may be something to a certain extent that I don't want to say it'd be a handicap. That might be a little bit too much, but I mean, I mean, compared to a guy that's a 4-time world champion, he's been in Formula One for a very, very long time, and his former teammate Sebastian Vettel. Here you have a guy that's only got a couple of years of Formula One under his belt. And, I mean, certainly what he can give the engineers in terms of feedback and things like that is valuable. but certainly you have to think that perhaps to a certain degree that that his age may factor into that a little bit. I mean, certainly as he grows older and as he matures as a driver, then he gets more experience under his belt. I mean, whatever he's going to give them is going to be valuable. I guess what I'm trying to say is that the more experience and time he has under his belt in Formula One, the more that's going to be, I think, more valuable to the team. I'm not suggesting that that it's going to be that he's not going to give them anything as the car doesn't drive good, and they'll be, well, why, Charles? Things, right? I mean, not like that at all. I mean, but certainly it kind of makes you wonder, because you've gone, if you had one really experienced driver, now you got two pretty young drivers in the biggest team in Formula One. So I mean, they've taken a pretty big gamble. But I mean, everything that I've heard about Carlos Sainz is that has been pretty positive, and he's very focused in that aspect as well. So it'll be very interesting to hear how these guys function within the team, and also how they work with the engineers and things like that. So it's just one of those other little stories in Formula One that's kind of interesting. And also what I thought was interesting was Ferrari team principal Mattia Binotto said this week that he feels that despite all the time in the simulators and some of these outings that Carlos has had in some of the older cars that they can run, that it's given him exposure to the way that they do the certain procedures they have in the team, how they operate and things like that. But he said, still having said that, that he doesn't think that he's going to be fully 100% integrated into the team by the time we hit the ground running here at Bahrain in a couple of weeks. And I can see that to a certain extent. I mean, it seems like a really, really long time now since we learned that Carlos Sainz was going to be replacing Sebastian Vettel at Ferrari this year. But still, I mean, just because it's been almost a year since that was made public and made known doesn't mean that he's actually been in that car and driving it. So yeah, I mean, it's there's going to be a certain amount of period of adjustment, and I certainly hope for Carlos's sake that he's still not struggling to integrate 4, 5, 6, 8 races into the season. But I don't think he will. I mean, just the fact that we talked about off the top of the show that there's less testing this year than in other years. Yeah, there's less opportunity too, but I mean, he's not the only one that's going to be facing that challenge this year.
Yeah, absolutely not. And I really don't have a lot to add here, but I think one of the drivers that's going to have some, I don't want to say struggles, but I think one of the drivers that obviously could have benefited from an extended winter testing season is Carlos Sainz. Because to your point, it feels like an eternity since he's been linked to Ferrari and he'd officially signed that contract, because really he'd signed that contract before last season even began. So he still had to conclude an entire calendar with McLaren, despite the fact that it was known he was going to Ferrari. I think the benefit in his case is, one, this isn't the first time that he switched teams, right? Like, it's not like he's a young driver that's only been with one team, or he's an older driver that's been with one team for 10 years. Like, he's been with Toro Rosso, he's been with Renault, he's been with McLaren. This is effectively the 4th time he switched. And by all accounts, he's easygoing, he's approachable, he's accessible, he's charismatic. I don't think there's going to be any issues integrating into the culture of that team. I think it's more about building familiarity and trust with his key advisors and his engineer. And that might take a little bit of time, but I think more importantly, it's about him becoming familiar with the car, and 3 days in Bahrain isn't enough to achieve that. So I think he's going to have to learn fast and hard as the season fast approaches.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to switch now from Ferrari to Alpine, because this I thought was interesting. They said that they are open to adding a partner team in Formula One. And this doesn't surprise me as much, that the fact that they want to supply engines to somebody else. But I find that it's a bit of a shift in what where they were this time last year under their former team principal Cyril Abiteboul, who basically said, yeah, we're good, we're in a good spot if we don't have to supply engines to anyone else, and we don't really need to. But I find it interesting that now A, they are, and B, the terminology partner team rather than, say, customer team. I find the language very, very interesting, Mark.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's funny because I was out running earlier today, and this entire scenario was playing through in my head, particularly about that they had this shift. And I also think it's kind of funny that in the past, the media was leaning into a team principle for commentary on whether they wanted to have a customer or a partner team. ultimately, I don't think that's a team principal decision. I think this is a board level direction at the highest levels of Alpine Renault. You know what? This is a major financial transaction. This isn't something that we're going to allow the team principal to ultimately decide. I guess ultimately the question is, who is that team going to be? And if you look at the teams right now, you got to think that Haas, for all the reasons we've talked about, and Sauber are deeply embedded and very comfortable with Ferrari for all the reasons that we've talked about. Ferrari is sharing a ton of resources and people capital with Haas to keep them afloat. We know what the Sauber, Alfa Romeo, Ferrari linkages are. I don't imagine any team would want to divorce themselves from Mercedes. The one story that I did read a couple of weeks ago, and it was purely speculation on the part of the journalist, is possibly a Williams link up. Mm-hmm. And Williams, they've been running that Mercedes power unit since the beginning of the turbo hybrid era. They had some initial success in 2014. They had that podium in 2017, but ultimately they just haven't been able to build a competent package around the power unit. But ultimately, if Alpine Renault could make it financially appetizing for them, is that a possible match? But at the same time, if you're Doleton and you just took over Williams and you want to make this team competitive, is that the right business move? Like, we have the best possible power unit, we just need to build a better package. Does it make sense that we still need to build a better package, but we have to build a better package around a less capable power unit? Like, I don't know, and I like to think about it, but I don't know who that partner team would be. Like, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, this scenario kind of played out in my head as well, and to me, I mean, the Williams link is the one that really sort of stands out. I mean, there's the historical link, like you mentioned,
great one,
and the fact that, like you very accurately, astutely mentioned as well. I mean, the Ferrari is just so intertwined with Haas and Alfa Romeo that it's kind of hard to tell where one ends and the other ends. Yeah, I mean, they're just the link between the Ferrari and those two customer teams is really, really tight. So I mean, when you kind of just do the mental math, I mean, Williams is the one that whether or not it happens is a completely different story, but it's the only one that really sort of makes sense. No, I mean, but I mean, the other thing is that you also that you hit on rather accurately as well, is that does it make sense from the point of view to switch from Mercedes power to something that isn't? And that is the big question, is whether they'd be willing to take that risk. But Williams, I think this year is in a much different place than they were a year ago, and I think that one of the things that really it was really quite sobering, I thought, when I read the news earlier this week, is that they're actually heading to Bahrain for testing with an upgrade to the car. Now, this might not sound like a big deal, but, especially to the, say, people that have only just been watching Formula One for a year or so, but it's not that long ago that this was a team that was struggling to get the car to the track in Barcelona for preseason testing. And when they got there, they were late. So, I mean, the fact that they're there and they actually have an upgrade to put on the car before even get to testing says to me, okay, things are changing there. Now whether or not that results in some real quantum leap in the performance of this car and it's going to pull them off the bottom of the the grid and move them up into some sort of competitive stature, I mean, completely remains to be seen. But they are doing something there, and I wouldn't be surprised too if they made a switch, just because I think that they realize, the new management realizes that, okay, if we want to drag this team off the bottom of the grid, perhaps we're going to have to take some risks. Maybe we're going to have to take some big ones, and maybe we're going to have to take some unorthodox risks. Now, whether or not you would have the stones to actually say, I really don't think I need a Mercedes, but I think we could be successful with a Renault engine. I mean, it would be a masterstroke. It would be pure brilliance if they could pull that off and succeed with something that isn't a Mercedes power unit. But maybe that's what they need to do. Maybe they need to be brave. Maybe they need to be unorthodox, because they've been stuck in the deepest of ruts.
The romantic in me would love this. And, we talked about this last week, that if you look at the current livery, especially with that splash of yellow, it harkens back to the 90s. And again, for a lot of our newer listeners that may not be familiar with Williams as a competitive team, they had an engine partnership with Renault back in the 90s. And I'll just read this off for you because I think this is interesting. With their Renault partnership, they won the Constructors' Championship in 92. There you go. For our YouTube listeners, there it is. They won the Constructors' Championship with Renault in 92, 93, 94, 96, and 97. And then they won the Drivers' Championship with Renault in 92, 93, 96, and 97. So there is a supreme history of success between those two teams. And you know what? You kind of hit on as well. Renault scored a couple of podiums last year, the first since they returned as a works team. What's to say that they aren't able to develop a competitive power unit? And the other thing too is that as the engine regs change and as we start seeing the cost cap imposed, maybe the relevance of having that Mercedes power unit is less and less and less important ultimately. But I would love to see it, but this is the only one to me that kind of makes sense. That kind of makes sense, that if they're looking for an existing team on the grid that they could partner with, this is the only one that seems to make sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you listening on the podcast, what I did is, here on my desk, I actually have, a 1/18 scale. It's an FW, 16 or 18? Let me just double check. I couldn't read it in the lights. Yeah, FW 18. So that was the 1996 Williams, and that was the year that Damon Hill won the World Championship. And I mean, that is one of those classic looks. I mean, right on the side of the engine cowling is Renault. So I mean, they do have that historical partnership. I mean, Jost Capito was with Williams. Now he believes that they can, they can, I guess, model or the revival similar to what McLaren has had. But I mean, the tie-up with Williams Renault is tantalizing because of the historical partnership. I mean, if Capito, the new Williams CEO wants to model that revival that McLaren's had over the past couple of years, maybe he has to remember, maybe took a look that McLaren Honda partnership, although that it looked really great on paper, didn't really work out so well. But I mean, Renault's obviously in a much different position than Honda was 4 or 5 years ago in Formula One. But certainly, I think that they may have to make some very brave and unorthodox choices to drag this team off the bottom of the grid. But one thing that they've also done that I think is really, really good and beneficial is that they've added 2009 Formula One World Champion Jenson Button. We talked about him a little bit earlier. He's going to be taking up a senior advisor role with the team, and I think a guy like Jenson, I think that's really good. I think he's he was a very successful, very good Formula One driver. And I think this, I think it ticks a number of boxes for me. I think it's a good role for Jenson to have. And I think, the kind of driver that he was, I think that he could bring something very, very valuable to Williams. They need people who know Formula One, who know how to be successful in Formula One. And even though he may not have been in the cockpit of a Formula One car recently, I mean, it's been a couple of years. I mean, he knows what it takes to be successful driving one of these cars. So I think that he may be an interesting sort of gap or a bridge between George Russell and Nick Latifi. I think he might be an interesting sort of piece in the puzzle, just to put it in there. I think that having him around would be very beneficial for George and for Nick.
There's no harm in surrounding your drivers with world champions. And that ultimately is what Jenson Button is. He is a Formula One world champion. He also has a world of experience. Like, this is a guy that started with Williams, I think back in 2000. He had a long career. As far as I'm concerned, his career ended in Abu Dhabi in 2016. I put that 2017 Monaco Grand Prix fiasco out of mind. As far as I'm concerned, his career ended at the end of 2016. But ultimately, I don't think it hurts. And the other benefit of this guy is he is relatively humble as far as world champions go, but he's clearly very articulate. He's approachable. He's accessible. I think he's a great personality to surround your young drivers with. One, they can ask questions. And I don't think this is a guy that's going to be at the factory 40 hours a week, that's going to be traveling with the team. But I think just making him accessible to their drivers is a good thing. But it's also a good thing for the team to put somebody like that in the factory and around the team, because it instills this sense of competence and and confidence that they don't necessarily have, right? You look at the bodies, they brought in Paddy Lowe, and that was a disaster, and he was gone. And you had Valtteri Bottas, and he was a capable driver, and then he was gone. And like, there's just been so much churn from a driver perspective and so much churn from a leadership perspective that I think it's really great that you bring in a pillar like this. And obviously Frank Williams had been there for a while, and he'd been a part of all of the championship teams, because obviously the team is named after his family. But with him gone, I think this adds some credibility and a pillar of expertise and competence within that organization. And again, I don't think his role is going to be particularly involved. I think this is largely a symbolic role for him, but I think any access your drivers can get to him, just in terms of asking questions or getting advice, that's a good thing. Totally a good thing.
Yeah, I've been struggling with something the past couple of days since I saw this announcement that Jensen would be taking this advisor role on. That I started just thinking about the whole sale to Dorilton Capital and Capito on this new regime coming in to run the team. And I thought it was really, I have real sort of difficulty kind of getting my mind around this one. That I was trying to put myself in the shoes of Sir Frank Williams and thinking, well, how do you deal with the situation when you've taken the team that you run in Formula One for 43 years or whatever it was, and the only way that I can now move my own team forward is to let somebody else do it? And I have not been able to really get my mind around it. And I mean, I think they did everything that they could possibly do to try and get this team competitive again. But I think ultimately, they realized that that they were just maybe at the end of the road, and I think they realized that the only way that they could save their team was to stand aside and let somebody else have a crack at it. And Dorilton came in, and all credit to them. I mean, they're keeping the name, they're keeping the heritage, and I mean, I hope that the name Williams stays around in Formula One for a long, long time. I mean, they did some fantastic things in Formula One, but that is certainly one that I have not been able to mentally solve just yet. But anyways, that's it, Mark. That's all I've got for the show this week. I think, well, I mean, we're running up now on our usual time. It's really kind of funny since we partnered up now several months ago that, I was doing shows myself about 45 to 50 minutes long, but, now we're pushing to, 90 minutes on every show, which you would kind of expect, when I have a turn speaking, you have a turn speaking, naturally the length of the show is almost doubled, which, seems to be a really, really good thing. Numbers have gone up. So we're doing something right here. Let's put it that way.
Totally.
Yeah. Anyways, like I say, that's all we've got for this week. I mean, just before we go, Mark, how close are we now? I mean, by the time obviously everybody starts listening to this, these first couple of test sessions will be in the bag. But what is the counter at now officially? Do you still have that handy? It was like an hour and something before we sat.
Yeah. So you probably noticed I was distracted. I was looking in the background. So as of that, 9 minutes and 48 seconds until preseason winter testing begins.
Yeah, well, should we tease people and hang on for another 9 minutes? No, we won't. We'll let them go.
Actually, we've got MotoGP corner, so let me just give us 15. I'm joking, 15 minutes. And by the way, I know people are going to ask. So obviously, I'm on Zoom calls, on Teams calls all day, and for whatever reason, I can't get my virtual background to work. So I actually put that canvas behind me. So when I sit like this, it kind of looks like I have a virtual background going. But that, if you're wondering, is Dubai, and I took that photo a few years ago in my showcase. And I am desperately trying to burn 9 minutes and 45 seconds here. So let me take you on a tour of my office. That is my Metacom Bear Brick. And up above that is a gigantic Funko Pop of the Notorious B.I.G. And earlier today, we're talking about the fantastic Christopher Wallace documentary that is on Netflix, and you should probably watch it. But I'm out of energy. We're not going to make it in another 9 minutes.
There you go. We'll let everybody off easy after only sitting around for the past 90 minutes. Anyways, thank you all very much for downloading, listening to the show, checking us out on YouTube. If you want to get in touch, by all means, do so. You can reach us on the email at scuderiaf1pod@gmail.com or on Twitter at scuderiaf1pod. And that's it. That's a wrap. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the first couple of test sessions. We'll be back next week to break that down, plus all the latest F1 news. And until then, take care and stay in touch. Bye for now.